Okay, so this article that we found, which was from National Catholic Register Online, as I mentioned the other day, was actually published 5 years ago, prior to his canonization. He has now been made a saint. So we're going to talk about him today, not to answer whether he should be made a saint, because he already is, but to look at the complexities about him, okay, and the time period that he represents. All right. Okay, so question number one was Junipero Serra? So let's just start with some real basic things about his background, okay? And again, hopefully you remember who had number. Okay, Ryan, you were one of the people who had number one. So can you tell us something about Junipero?
He was an 18th century physician who was a very successful philosophy teacher.
Uh-huh. Okay, all right, so that's good. So 18th century, I have the years that he was born. He was born in 1713. His entire life basically was within the 18th century, okay? And as you said, he was a Franciscan, so he was a member of that religious order, okay? He was a priest, all right? And as you mentioned, Ryan, he also was a philosopher teacher. And he lived his young years in Spain, so he was Spanish, okay? He was from Europe, okay? But at some point in his life, he decided to leave Spain and come to what they call the New World, okay? And he ended up on the west coast of the Americas, with what we're going to talk about, okay? But he was from Spain. He actually lived in Spain for several years before coming to the Americas, okay? All right, and of course he did missionary work, all right? Let's go ahead and go to number two, since he did found missions, okay? In fact, I'll throw in, because I don't think the article made this clear, but he spent most of his time in what we would call California today, okay? And he founded several missionaries. And some of these missionaries eventually evolved into major cities, okay? Maybe you've heard of some of these cities, like San Diego. Heard of San Diego? They're having a pretty good baseball year, by the way, okay? San Francisco, all right? Santa Clara, which is where this historian was from, okay? Santa Clara was originally a mission. Has anyone ever heard of San Juan Capistrano, which is in Southern California? Okay. Who's ever been out to California? Two people? Okay, well, if you go out to California, especially the southern coastal part, lots of missionaries, okay? And a lot of those cities originally were founded as missionaries. So, Junipero Serra helped found that. So that's, one of his great accomplishments. All right, so let's talk about these missionaries. Question number two was, what was the purpose of them? Okay? So who was one of our number two? Okay? Okay.
The purpose was to spread the gospel to those who have not been baptized.
Okay, yeah, it was a twofold mission, okay? And maybe you've learned this in 8th grade social studies. When the Europeans came over to the New World, they obviously were not only trying to establish control over land, but they were also trying to spread their culture. And part of that was religion, okay? So the missions that were established, their job was to try to spread the gospel and spread Catholicism, okay? Because, of course, Spain was a Catholic country. And then the other thing that they wanted to do, it wasn't just about preaching Christianity. See, Carson, did you have that one?
To take in native people and make them citizens of Catholicism to have one army.
Uh-huh. Yeah, so there was the religious component, and then there was the culture. They wanted to try to make the natives, the people that were already living here, to become more like Spanish people, okay? And you mentioned, they wanted them to know how to grow crops. They wanted them to hopefully learn the Spanish language, and they wanted them to become Catholic, okay? So they were trying to make the natives like themselves, okay? And, of course, the big part of that was converting them to Catholicism. Okay, so that's a really good answer there. Okay, so number three, it said, what was the religious aim? And this is where Junipero comes in. And how did he try to convert the Indians, the Native Americans? What was the goal of these missions, and what was kind of his goal as well? We know what they wanted to do, but what was their way of going about it? So this was question 3. Who had 3? See, Seth?
I don't think I have the second poll, but I have a...
Okay. Go ahead and share what you have in the first part.
Taste and see that the Lord is good. God
Okay.
is like candy. You don't know what you're missing out until you try it, but once you do, you'll
Okay, yeah, that was the Bible quote that Hunepero liked to use. It came from Psalm 33 in the Bible. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Yeah, how many of you remember us? I think we've sung that song before. It's a church hymn. Taste and see. We haven't. I don't think we've sang it in a while, but yeah, that comes from the Bible. So his message to the natives was, "Hey, come and check out our God." Okay, taste and see. And you use the phrase "candy." Okay, it was like trying to attract them and say, whatever you believe in now, our God, is God, and it will make your life better. Okay, so that's exactly right. Taste and see that the Lord is good. So he had a positive message, for the native people. Okay, all right. I think that's good enough for that one. That's a good answer for the number 3. All right, number 4. Why did the Indians? It says Indiana. But why did the Indians actually go to the missions? Okay, so let's talk about that. And then the other question was, did he really know why they were coming to the missions? See, Harrison.
After the Indians went, so Giacomo presented 6 children hopes that the priest would spare them. And then they also went because they could not do at the missions.
Yes, that's correct. So they were coming to these missionaries because they needed food, and the missions, of course, did have food. Okay, a lot of these religious orders, they were self-sufficient, and they grew food. So a lot of the natives who needed food came there hoping to get that. And then as you also added, they were hoping that maybe when they were sick, they would get help from the mission as well. And those are things that they did provide, okay? So they were coming because they needed things. Now, the second follow-up part of that was, did he realize that's why they were coming? This starts to represent maybe his misunderstanding of them at the time. Did he know that that's why they were coming to the missions? For food and medicine? Anybody else have that question? Because that was the follow-up there. See, Lizzie?
I mean, I didn't have the question, but I kind of infer that no, because
Uh-huh.
I thought that they just wanted to become Catholic.
Yeah, it did say that in the article. He didn't really realize that. He saw all these natives, flocking to their mission there and like, oh, wow, look how eager they are. They want to be Christianized, okay? Let me preach to them. And it's like, well, maybe they were open to that, but they really were there because they needed food, okay, and medicine. And the missions attracted them to that. All right. Okay, let's go to that was, we're ready for number 5. How did this religious aim of the mission square with the other aim, the imperial aim? Okay? So number 5, who found some information on that one? See, Anna, you had that one?
I'm not sure if it's exactly right, but I but he wanted to protect the people in general and separate them.
Okay. Yeah. He did see himself in a way as their protector. And I think this is one of the positive things about Sarah, is that he does seem to have cared for them. Now, when you get into the dynamics of these colonial empires, and of course, the Spanish were the first ones really to get over here because of Columbus, okay? You had on the one hand these governors and these soldiers, the conquistadors, who were over here to conquer land, find gold, and basically exploit the land and the people. Okay, that was their attitude. Then you had a lot of these priests, like Hunepero, who were coming over here, and they wanted to spread the gospel, and they wanted to try to convert the local people. They were not so much in, hey, how can we use these people? It was, let's save souls. Let's convert them to our faith. Okay, so you had soldiers on the one hand who really weren't very sympathetic to the local people, and then you had people like Sarah who really did want to help them. Okay, so there was kind of a conflict between them. Now, have you ever studied about Las Casas?
Yes, you do.
Oh, you are right now. Okay, well, that's great. Okay, so, Las Casas would be another example of someone like Hunepero who really tried to stand up for the natives against a lot of the exploitation and a lot of the bad things, actually, that happened because of what the Spanish were doing. Okay, so he really did want to try to help them. Okay, now, as we're going to get a little bit deeper in the article, was he really helping them? Okay, all right, do you want to add, Harrison? Okay, oh, you're just holding on to the window shade there? Well, somebody has to, right? Okay, let's go ahead and keep going on here. It says, would you say that the Indians were enslaved by the missionaries? Okay, that's pretty harsh language there. So what did this article say? And this really gets to the crux of kind of the time period and how Europeans looked upon the local people. See, Cameron?
I said, although my students with the Indians were regarded as lower class but not property, they weren't regarded as enslaved people, but they were still looked down upon by them.
Okay, yeah, that's an excellent answer. So the short answer is there, no, they were not slaves because they were not considered property to be bought and sold. However, there is no doubt that the Europeans, and maybe even Sarah, someone like him, did kind of look down upon them and that they were inferior to the Europeans. Okay, it was like, these native peoples, look at how uncivilized they are. If we could just come in and make them more like us, okay, that's what we need to do. All right. So yeah, they definitely kind of looked down upon them in that regard. And I think the article said that's about like 99% of Europeans. Okay, that was just the way they looked upon the people in the New World. Okay. All right, number 7. Let's get what Sarah's attitude and behavior was towards the Native Americans. There's a word they used in the article that hopefully, if this was your question, that you answered, because it's very telling. That was actually yours? Okay.
Paternalistic?
Yeah, they used the word paternalistic. Paternalistic. Now, for those of you who didn't read that part of the article, do you know what paternalistic means?
Oh, I know. Like fatherly or parent. It means like you're like
It's kind of like you're the parent, and they're the child, and they need to be taken care of, and you have to tell them what to do, because really they can't fend for themselves. Okay? And it does seem like that was kind of Sarah's attitude is, well, these people are like little children, okay? And I'm going to take care of them. Even if they're grown adults, they still, they're not adults like us, okay? So he kind of saw himself as a parent, which means he did care about them. But he also was kind of like, I will decide for you. So the missionaries were kind of like, we're going to teach you how you need to be, okay? And again, that was very much kind of, the attitude of the time period. Okay, so yeah, paternalistic would be the word to use. All right, number 8, were the Indians converted at the missions? How successful was he? Well, we know these missions did grow, so from the outside, you're like, well, yeah, these were very successful. But we're getting to, were they really being successfully converted to Catholicism? See, Will, what did you find?
I said that they were somewhat converted.
Uh-huh.
And that they incorporated Christianity into their own.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's like they were kind of converted. They did obviously take some of the basic traditions, since we've been talking about traditions, that of course made up the Catholic faith. But that didn't mean that they completely rejected their own, what I guess what we call pagan ways, okay? Their belief in different gods, kind of the spirit world. They kind of blended things they already believed in with things that Sarah and other missionaries were teaching them, okay? I think the word that they used in the article was syncretism, is what you blend together, okay? And that happened quite a bit, okay? You might know that, have you guys studied the Aztecs and the Maya and the Inca? Okay, so again, you're doing that also. So you probably will, if you haven't already, you'll learn that when the Spanish came over to that part of the world, they kind of converted the Aztecs, okay? You shouldn't be ripping people's heart out and making sacrifices, but they still held on to a lot of the different gods and beliefs that they had. So they weren't fully brought into the faith, okay? So that's a great answer that you gave there, Will. Okay, let's go to number 9. Did Sarah like the Indians? Okay, did he like them? All right, so let's see, Jack, you had that one. What did it say?
He enjoyed spending time with the unbaptized ones, but when anyone in the political or government system came in, he had struggled with them.
All right, so the short end of the article was that he did seem to like them. Okay, he liked the Native Americans. That doesn't mean that he necessarily always treated them exactly how we would want him to, but in general, he did seem to care about them. And as I mentioned earlier, Sarah really did not like the soldiers and the administrators and the governors, because their objective was very different. It was conquer this land, exploit it, because that's what our empire is about. And then you have someone like Sarah who's like, well, we need to try to help these people, okay? So he tended to like the natives, and he did not really like a lot of the Spanish soldiers and administrators, okay? Now, let's flip that around. What did they think of him? What did the natives think of Sarah? So Anna, you had that one.
Yeah, the Indians did like Sarah, and he looked different than the Spaniards because he was like older and thinner,
Mm-hmm.
and he was really kind to them, so they were kind back, and they called them the old priest.
That's right. It's a great answer there. So, one of the things was, but in the time that we're talking about, like 1770s, 1780s, near the end of his life, he was so much older than most of the other people. Most people who came over to the New World were, young, vigorous soldiers, looking for, to make fortunes. But you had someone like Junipero who was already kind of an older man, and they kind of saw the soft side of him. And Annie mentioned in the article that they called him the old priest, Paje Viejo, which in Spanish is old father. So he was almost kind of like a grandfather figure to them, okay? At least to some of them, okay? I mean, that doesn't mean every one of them looked at him that way, but they did kind of look upon him as kind of a fatherly figure, okay? So that's a great answer there. All right, number 11, were the Indians exploited to support the mission system, okay? So let's say, and the article kind of hints that this was something that did happen. Let's see, Addie, you had that one.
I said, yes, they were responded. They were treated really badly after he died, and it became different when he died. The young girls and women were walking away from because missionaries saw soldiers would rape them if they didn't.
Uh-huh.
And the women were more vulnerable to diseases because they were taught that what's wrong with
Mhm.
those girls, and they also had to.
All right, very good. Those are all things that the article did mention. So basically, after he died in 1784, things got worse, okay? I think the article mentioned that the imperial policy, the colonial policy of the Spanish, once they had kind of taken over all of that part of the West Coast, they basically took the land, and it was basically given to Spanish settlers, all right, which, that land that had been the natives now was, controlled and owned by Spanish landowners, and that they really did start to exploit them. Many of the natives started to have to work, on the land to grow crops for the landowners, and of course they didn't benefit much from that, okay? So, and then the diseases, like Addie mentioned, disease began to spread, and of course, as you know, that was one of the most devastating things for all the Native Americans in the Americas, okay? Because the diseases wiped out a lot of them, all right? Now that doesn't mean that Junipero Serra wanted that stuff to happen, but, the foundations had been laid, and then as time went on, they were exploited, okay, by, again, soldiers and, the colonial governors and such. Yes?
What's exploited?
That means taken advantage of, okay? Yeah, it means taken advantage of. And again, they did start to suffer. In fact, maybe Junipero, if he had known all that stuff, he probably would have been, really horrified by that. Okay? All right, let's go ahead and keep going here. That was 11. Number 12, what happened to the Indians in the mission land when the government ended the system in the 1830s? Again, the missionary system was, these missions were set up so that the natives could come there and be, Christianized and I guess you would say, enculturated. But pretty soon, they just took over all the land and they became basically just workers, okay, for economic exploitation. All right, who had number 12? This is kind of a follow-up to that same question, okay? Let's see, Lily?
The Mexican government divided the land among the California families, and then the Indians took the ranches and became good laborers, and they would
Mhm.
practice similar, but they could leave if they wanted.
Okay, so getting back to that question, they weren't slaves, but they also were in a position where they didn't have a lot of freedom, and a lot of them ended up working on ranches, okay, working for practically nothing, and the ones that benefited from that were the landowners, the Spanish landowners. One of the things that I found in the article that I jotted down, because this gets to what did Sarah think about all of this? Before he had died, he had said, "This land belongs to the Indians. We hold it in trust." All right, so that kind of gets to kind of what his feeling was, is that this is their homeland. But, does anyone know what a trust is? If something's held in trust, it means that there's somebody that technically it belongs to somebody else, okay, but a person is kind of has control over it. Trusts are actually used quite a bit when you have like a young person who's not old enough to inherit property or money, and instead they'll be an adult who kind of, the idea is that, well, it is theirs, but because they're not old enough to take care of it, I'm in charge of it until they get old enough to get it, okay? Well, that was kind of, again, how it was with the Spanish. It's like, well, this is their land, but we want to try to show them how to use the land and be more productive. So we're going to kind of control it for them, okay? But then what ended up happening is the land was just taken, okay? And Sarah would not have agreed with that, but that did happen, okay? Let's see, Bella.
Can you say the quote again?
He said the land belonged to them, the Indians, and he said we hold it in trust, which was kind of his way of saying that we're going to take care of the land for them, but it's their land. But, later that's not what happened, okay? Their land was taken. Okay, number 13. No one had that one, but this kind of gets to the whole essence of this article. It says, what about the issue of Sarah's canonization? Now, as I've already mentioned, he's already been canonized. He was canonized in September of 2015. That was 5 years ago. In fact, it was almost 5 years ago to the day, okay? He was made a saint. So this article is trying to say, well, should he, I guess we would say, should he have been canonized? Should we laud him? Is this a person worthy of having statues? Just how should we look at him and people like him, okay? So one of the things, I know you didn't have to read this in the article, but the author, he had said, he wasn't against him being canonized, but he did say, just because he's being made a saint doesn't mean that we should approve all the stuff that happened back at that time. The missionary system had problems with it. It wasn't perfect, okay? There were, things, exploitation, going back to that word, there were things that certainly the Native Americans did suffer with through the mission system. So even though we can make someone like Junipero Serra a saint, it doesn't mean that we're stamping and saying that everything that he did and everything that people did at that time was okay, okay? The other thing that he said in the article is that he should not be blamed for everything that happened after his death, okay? The exploitation, the taking of the land, the diseases, those were not things that he really wanted to happen, okay? But they did happen. But he shouldn't be completely blamed for it. And going back to what Ryan had started our article with was, he lived in Spain. He was a philosopher teacher. He had really a good position. And he made the decision to leave Spain to come over here to the New World, which was not an easy thing to do, because he really believed that he wanted to spread the gospel to new people in new lands. Okay, so he made a lot of tremendous sacrifices, and he did try to defend them. Okay, he was an advocate for them. All right, everything that we seem to have from his writings does seem that he did care about them.
So are we saying that he should be canonized?
Well, what the article was saying is that if he's made a saint, that doesn't mean that we're saying that everything about that time period was okay, because we know there were bad things that came out. But he should not be blamed for all that, okay? He should not be blamed for that. Now, a couple things. This statue in the middle, okay, is actually in the Capitol in D.C. And we mentioned this last year, actually. In the national capital in Washington, D.C., every state gets two statues, two people that kind of represent the history of that state. You might recall that Indiana, Lew Wallace, is one of our two statues. Well, for the state of California, Junipero Serra is one of the two statues, okay, and he has been for almost 100 years. So he is revered, but again, he's also a controversial figure, and he's one of the people. He's had statues that have been destroyed. This has happened in the last few months because people look at someone like him and say, "Oh, he was part of the oppression, of the local people." So this comes back to that question of how should we judge people who lived back at times who had problematic backgrounds. Okay, again, we can't say Sarah was a perfect person, but we also shouldn't just blame him or maybe hold him to our standards. Okay, because obviously in today's world we would not like the idea of people in another country having their land taken and being made to suffer in ways like a lot of the Native Americans did. Okay, but I like the phrase that said you can't export a view like our modern day view back to the 18th century and say, well, he should think exactly like we do today, okay? Because he's not from that time period, okay? So, again, he's a complex figure. There's good things about him, but there's also bad, all right? But we have to take the good and the bad and kind of look at the whole picture before we make judgments. Okay? Did anyone have anything else to add to that? Okay, so again, in social studies right now, you're studying the colonial period?
We've been
Okay.
tested.
Oh, you've already been tested on it?
No, it's today.
Oh, it's today. Okay. All right. Well, maybe today might have helped you a little bit to help for that. Okay? All right, so I'm going to stop right there.